All Sail Set, Chapter 1. I meet Donald Mackay and swear a vow. If, by the grace of God, I should live 3 years longer, I will be 100 years old. Aye, a ripe age. Any way you look at it. There are trees in California, sequoias they call them, that have seen 1,000 winters. There are insects that are born and die before a minute ends. Well, a man's life sails its course between those extremes. 70, the Bible says. But shucks, that's scarce a babe's age when you're 97. Funny thing about age, it's like climbing a mountain. When you're nigh the top, you turn to look back now and again. If your eyesight's good, and mine is as keen as a petrel's, if I do say it as shouldn't, you can pick things out in the valley. Men going about their chores, a dog lying in the sun, the river where it turns under the bridge. Memories like that, too. Just cast your eye back along it when you've most reached the century mark, and you'll see a powerful lot of things. Of course, they don't all stand out alike. Some are kind of blurry around the edges, and some are so faint you can scarce see them at all. But there are others, plenty of them, clear and sharp. I remember why, by the great horn spoon, I remember seeing slaves up on the block being sold at public auction. I remember Lincoln's funeral and the fever that ran through the country when Booth was captured. I recall when I was only a shaver of 6, squaring off to fight Charles Dickens because he called Americans savages and it got my dander up. Big things were happening. There was a young fellow named Sam Morse who turned his back on a promising career as a portrait painter to tinker with the telegraph. Blatherskite, sober folks called him. Matthew Maury was working out his theory of the natural laws governing winds and currents, charting those sea lanes down which the California clippers were to sail to everlasting glory. Steam and Erickson crew were turning the maritime world keel up. Steam paddle boats could do 8 and 9 knots in an hour. The age was crying, "Speed! More speed!" If America had hoped to compete with the subsidies and monopolies of the old world, her ships must show their heels to all rivals. In England, Samuel Cunard had established his famous steamship line. When his Britannia, snorting like grampus, pulled into Boston Harbor in the summer of 1840, public enthusiasm swept high. Here was the proper challenge, to fan into flame the spark of the American genius for shipbuilding. The wind ships sharpened their bows, adjusted their spirits to a keener angle, and cracked on more and more sail to hold their own against the invader. The bluff-bowed East India men were doomed. It was sundown for them and dawn for the clipper. Roaring days, those, of iron fists and hearts of oak. America's golden age on the sea. But it was a losing fight. Sometimes I envy the men who, unlike myself, never lived to see the finish. Steam's triumph over sail. The old ships are gone and the men who manned them. Floating hotels, driven by engines, have taken their place. Ingenious inventions, I grant you. But ships? Ho! Funny thing about the art of shipbuilding. Men practiced it for centuries before they produced the grand clippers of the 50s. But it died almost within a decade. The engine won out. The art has gone, like the ships themselves, and gone are the wildest, sweetest, freest years of life. So, in these latter days, you must pardon an old man while he casts his eye backward and remembers the days when life was as fresh as a morning at sea, and the sky was swept by the winds of surprise. Show me the boy who doesn't love ships. East Boston, where I was born, was a small lad's paradise, for here ships were built. Here they set sail for voyages to the world's end. Here they returned, heavy with ivory and pearl shell and oil and whalebone, and here finally they rode at anchor, the rake of their masts beckoning like a finger to a lad who stood on the threshold of eager venture. Every hour that I was not in school found me at the wharves, watching the loading and unloading, listening to the talk of sailormen and the rousing shanties. Aye, they sang them lustily, I can warrant. Oh, a Yankee ship comes down the river, blow, my bully boys, blow. Her yards and masts, they shine like silver, blow, my bully boys, blow. Backs bent to work, feet braced, brown arms hauling, the smell of tar on a blackened wharf of hemp, of bananas, rotting in the ship's hold. Such smells and sights and sounds formed the background of my childhood. At this time, my best friend was old Messina Clark. What his age may have been, no one could say. He was known as Old Messina. The adjective seemed to reach into antiquity. A small man he was, but tough. His eyes had been bleached of color under many suns. Wrinkles furrowed his face, and his lower jaw was fringed in a scrub of white beard. He carried a spyglass, as some men carry a cane, and I never recall seeing him abroad without it. The old man lived at the foot of my street in a shingled house that was like 100 others of its day, yet had a sort of sea-going look about it. Perhaps it was the figurehead on the front lawn, a roundish mermaid with cheeks puffed to blow a conch. Perhaps it was the lanterns that hung to starboard and larboard of the door, or the ship models seen through the windows. Maybe it was just that the house sheltered Messina Clark, and so reflected the man who lived inside it, for never was there a brinier salt to come final anchor. I realize now what it was that attracted the old man to me, for he was a talker, and I was a listener. We shared a common passion in the sea. As I came to know all his anecdotes by heart. Anecdotes means like stories. It was a simple matter to put in the word that suggested a new story, as the one he was telling drew to a close. And what tales they were! Mutinies under the Southern Cross, a captain swinging from the yardarm, pirates in the China Sea, and opium smuggling off Madagascar, slave runners plying their trade between the Ivory Coast and the South American market, yellow jack and whales, and cannibals and pearls. The old man had started out in life as a cabin boy on a whaler, rising to the envied position of harpooner. From that, by slow and logical degrees, boat header, then chief mate, finally, captain. Thus, he brought his adventures to a close, but relived them all from day to day in memory. Once I heard my father refer to him as a tiresome old man, but to me he was the veritable source of all wisdom. Why, he was like a god who held the winds and storms in answer to his command. Old Messina taught me all that I ever knew about a ship until I came to sail in one. He showed me how to turn a splice. That means to join two cords or ropes together, to tie a score of knots, to shoot the sun and box the compass. Geography came to life all of a sudden, and places like Zamboanga and Malabar rang as familiar to my ear as Nantucket or Salem. Holding one of his precious ship models on his knee, old Messina would demand, "What's the longest name of any line aboard, lubber?" I would rack my brain, go hot and cold, feel a flush of fever in my cheek as I fished for the proper answer. The old man's anger was lightning let loose. The air of the quarter-deck hung about him still. I would stammer out the first rope that came to mind. "No, it ain't, neither," he would bellow, shaking his fist under my nose. "It's the main t'gallant. Stuan's bloom-tracing line. boom tricing line. And don't you forget it till the next time I ask, or I'll scalp you like a bloomin' cannibal. When the Empress of Asia, on her return from China, carrying a cargo worth $500,000, went down off the Horn with all hands, my father was a ruined man. He was a merchant, and the cargo had been his private venture. That means he lost everything. That ship went down with all its hands. That means the entire crew died. So when it said his father was ruined, means he lost everything. He never recovered from the blow. A year later, when I was 14, he died, leaving my mother and me with scarce enough to keep body and soul together. My mother gave music lessons and finally was forced to take a few paying guests into our home. But even this proved insufficient to our needs. It was up to me to do something to swell the family income. Naturally, I looked toward the sea. My mother, with the memory of the Empress of Asia fresh in her mind, begged me not to think of sail. My father had friends among the shipbuilders, so it was upon them that I cast my eye. Gold had been struck in California. Around the Horn, over mountains and prairies, people were swarming. 90-odd thousand of them on the Pacific coast were clamoring for food, for clothing, for necessities of existence. The long-neglected shipyards came to life, while new ones sprang up with mushroom growth on the shores of Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire. In the harbor of East Boston, there was an unbroken line of yards stretching from Jeffreys Point to Chelsea Bridge. Humming with industry, they were, in answer to the call of the Gold Coast. Flour was bringing $40 a barrel, sugar $4 a pound. Shoes were selling at $45 a pair, and laudanum $1 a drop. The miners could wash from $100 to $1,000 worth of gold dust in a day, and often the profits from one voyage of a fast clipper would pay for the original cost of the ship. At the foot of Border Street, Donald Mackay and his shipyard. Donald Mackay. There's magic in the name. He was a young man at the time, not more than 37 or 38, I would say, but already his name was upon every tongue. It's the necessities of an age that produce the men it needs. Donald Mackay was one of those by whom a period in history is remembered. John Griffiths of New York started the ball a-rolling with the Sea Witch, the first true clipper. Thatcher McGowan of Mystic River fame crowded Thatcher McGowan of Mystic River fame crowded close upon his heels. But it was Mackay who carried shipbuilding onward to new heights. Creative artist and master engineer he was, a dreamer too, but with the drive of energy to bring his dreams to reality. Even the names of his ships quicken the blood and conjure up a vision before the eye. Staghound, Lightning, Westward Ho, Sovereign of the Seas, Flying Cloud. These were but a few of the 60 or more that stood to his final credit. Many times I had heard my father speak of him with admiration. Only the old diehards were set against the man. Turning a ship's bows inside out wasn't natural in a ship, they maintained, and at first it looked as if they were right. The clippers did drive themselves under until their commanders learned to crowd most of their canvas on the main and mizzen. Those are the names of some masts, right? Then the record began to give the lie to the old man's croaking. In Toplift's newsroom, the Marine Intelligence column of the Transcript published arrivals and clearances that confounded the wiseacres. China and back within 6 months? Ridiculous, but true. Ships that averaged, if the transcripts didn't lie, 15 3/4 knots an hour. A knot equals 1 nautical mile per hour. So So if they were going 15 3/4 knots an hour, that means they were going 15 3/4 miles per hour, which I suppose is pretty fast for a sailing ship. Well, muttered the diehards, you couldn't believe everything you saw in print. But the old order was changing. Men were talking speed. Speed in terms of dollars. I was determined to try to see Donald Mackay. That afternoon, as I made my way to Border Street, the wharves were humming with activity despite the biting December air. News had just been signaled from Telegraph Hill that a clipper was in sight. Boston bound. Men were grouped on the street corners, speculating as to her ownership, laying bets on her speed, her cargo. Clerks poked their heads out of counting house windows. Spyglasses were trained eastward. It was a scene that I knew and loved. Vessels were moored at the very doors of the warehouses, discharging their cargoes for landing for the far places of the world. Lading for the far places of the world. Clippers and brigs and barkentines shoved at one another, the arrogant angle of their sprits jutting up across the street as high as the third story of the storehouses. I saw the house flag of Enoch Trains packets fluttering its white diamond on the red ground. Here was the sea, come to meet the land and declare a truce. Here men made ready to have their business upon the great waters. I hurried along Border Street, past Central Square. There they were, the Mackay Yards. I turned in at the entrance to a fenced-in area, and my ear was assailed by the whir of saws, the ring of axes, the fused sounds of wood and metal in the shaping. A smell of fresh sawed pine and oak smote my nostrils. Outside the frame building that housed Donald Mackay's drafting room and mold loft, I paused. It took some courage to enter. Once inside, it wasn't so bad. I looked at the stool perchers bent over their ledgers and took heart. Pale men they were, existing on the salt edge of adventure. Nothing scary about them. The prestige of my father's name turned the trick. I was permitted to climb a narrow wooden stair leading to the drafting room above. The sanctum sanctorium. That means like the most holy place. I lifted my fist to knock. I stopped. Behind that door, Donald Mackay was at work. I realized that I was trembling. Swallowing hard, I thumped the panel. "Come in," boomed a voice. I opened the door and entered. In the gloom of the vast room, all I could see for a moment was the square of light where the window gave on the shipyards. A man was bent over a drafting table. My eyes, accustoming themselves to the gloom, took in many things at once. A high-ceilinged room with rows of shelves lining the walls. In a far corner, a cherry-bellied stove glowed to defeat the outer chill. There was a clutter of nautical paraphernalia everywhere. A model clipper with false gun ports painted along her sides. A mounted shark whose slim hull was marked off in geometric sections. Samples of copper and wood and sailcloth, whale oil lamps above the drafting table, a set of bellows worked by pedals that could create a miniature wind of hurricane hazard from any point of the compass. Wooden lift models and mechanical drawings, many strange seagoing devices that would have baffled a landlubber. I started to speak, then stopped. My attention had been caught and riveted by the model of a ship cradled in its wooden brace. Clean-lined and eager as a greyhound she was. No tailboards, no cat head carving, no ornamental barnacles of any sort. She had the lean belly of a sprinter, and from the sudden sharpness of her stem, the figure of an angel rose with trumpet poised, like a herald of good tidings, and in the uprush of the figure, I could almost hear the ringing gladness of the trumpet blast. Here was the core and essence of a ship to carry herself with pride before the wind, from truck to keel, From rudder post to jib boom, she was a miracle of proportion and grace. In the shaft of cold sunlight that slanted through the window, she seemed almost to breathe, and I caught my own breath in wonder. I felt as if all the sinews of my body had been plucked by an unseen hand and set a humming as a vessel's cordage hums to a sudden bursting gale. I wanted to shout and sing, but my tongue was silent. Only a model of a ship, but enough. She was beauty moving toward perfection. Thus I first saw the flying cloud. As if it were yesterday, I remember that moment. Perhaps destiny, hovering above our heads, sweeps close enough sometimes for us to feel the brush of its wing. I knew that this ship and my life were to be bound up together, come what might. Weel, young lad, and what might ye be after? The voice of the man at the drafting table brought me back with a start. A flavor of the Highlands hung about his speech, like a smell of heather blown across the moor. That means, I think, that he was from Scotland. I saw a stocky man, ruddy colored, with thick black hair growing out after its own impulse, his chin square and deep cleft. My throat felt tight, and my voice small, but I remember the friendliness that sparked his eyes as he glanced across the drawing table at me. I want a position, sir. And what can ye do? I draw ships, too, came my answer with courage, mustered from somewhere. He laughed then. Hoot! And that's a broad declaration. What's your name? Enoch Thatcher, son of Joel Thatcher, the merchant. When I nodded in the affirmative, he said, I knew your father weel, laddie. A fine man he was, too. His mouth relaxed into a smile, and I felt my heart grow warm toward him. Donald Mackay turned and laid his hand upon the ship model that cast the spell over me. For a moment he was silent. I caught ye looking upon the ship, he said at last. His eyes lighted, and he moved his fingers over the model with a sculptor's touch. Up New York way they've been saying that we Dooneasters canna build ships to outsail theirs. Weel, they can tuck around, turn out of theirs, I don't know how to read this, and go to Tophet. I ken that this sweet lassie will make them eat their words. She'll be as quick and light as in a howling blaw, or I'm a Dutchman. Look ye how I've sharpened her bows, and flattened her forebody, and peeled her under the counters. She'll hold to a maximum speed without driving her cell under. And as for they newfangled teapots that run with engines, he gave a snort of disgust and patted the model almost with reverence. The end of sail, the wise oracles are saying. Just wait till you take to water, my pet. Turning back toward me, he demanded, and what makes ye come to me for a position? So basically he's talking about how fast his new design is going to be, and that it's going to be able to outrun or at least compete with the steamships. Well, sir, I stammered, I often heard my father speak of you as a man of genius, sir, and I've loved ships ever since I was born. I was twisting my hat and wondering why I had been cursed with such a clumsy tongue. Donald Mackay looked at me with those piercing eyes that could have found out the flaw in any living thing. So ye love ships, eh? He chuckled. I mind when I was your age I loved 'em too. Grand fun it was to be astraddle a skysail yard, swaying to the pitching o' the ship. Sometimes as I sit here on land designing ships for the other men to sail about, I think about it a lot, and remember the gales and the storms. And I tell ye, it makes a shiver run through the marrow o' my bones. Ye ken, laddie, there are men this world who ne'er see a drop o' water, what they wash in. To them the sea is In odds an old wife's tale, without muckle o' truth to it. But for men like you and me, laddie, it's a braw sight, and ane that plucks at your heart wi' cold fingers. Bonny, but awesome. His eyes had the look of a man who sees a vision, and I held my breath lest I break the spell. Donald Mackay turned back toward his work. All right, laddie, he said abruptly. I'll sign ye on. $3 a week, and mind ye spend it cannily. Nip awa home, and report tomorrow. I was dismissed. I could only stammer my thanks as I backed toward the door and stumbled over the boot scraper. My mind churned with the things I had seen and heard and felt. In a stride, Donald Mackay had taken his place beside Messina Clark as one of the gods of my childhood. But there was a pivot, a focal point around which even he whirled as a minor impression. As they say, a satellite whirls about an orb of greater magnitude, the flying cloud. Out in the street again, I stood stock still before Mackay's office, stood there like one daft, and stared up at his window, through which I could see the top of his head as he bent over his work. The flying cloud, to work all day within hand's reach of her, to see her taking shape as one week merged into another, expanding, growing to the fulfillment of her perfection, to have a part, no matter how small, in her creation. The gold of that wintry late afternoon was round about me. The striking of the old South Church bell reached my ear across the clean air. The sea was as blue as an oath. I felt suddenly charged with resolution and purpose. A knight of old, seeing a vision of the Grail, could have known no more solemn consecration than I did. For the flying cloud, I vowed, I would give the best that was in me. My strength, my youth, my life, if need be.